I think a lot of the energy policy was led by people, in Toronto and Montreal and New York who all have energy. They've never had a day in their life where they flicked the switch and it didn't come on. At a household level, it's meant that people are paying sometimes $1,000 a month. The highest bill I heard was $1,500 a month.
You say
To heat
$1,000 a
your
month?
house, $1,000 a month.
And I know these people are not living in mansions.
They're
Even
not
mansions
living in
don't pay- even
mansions.
mansions don't pay this much.
There's no reason anybody should be impoverished by heating their homes. And what are the options for getting this done? There are lots of options. I think of myself as an 18-year-old. I took one course in political and economic ethics at my CJEP, and I was like, down with the corporations. And I don't know, I had all these crazy ideas. I had no idea what I was talking about, nor had I had any of these opinions before I took my course. For most of human history, most people were poor. And a very few people, the king and the other aristocrats or whatever, were wealthy. That is such a great idea. Now we're cooking up ideas on your show. We're gonna take this.
You know where I'm coming from. you know what's coming next. All right. So today I am very happy for us to be welcoming actually a friend. She's become a friend now, and her name I was going to say her name, but she's right here with us. Shannon Joseph, how are you?
I'm great, Magat. Thank you so much. I'm so excited. We are finally doing this.
Me too. And I have to thank you for that. So Shannon, let's get right into it. I think it would be really cool, maybe to get us started, that people have a better, understanding of who Shannon is. Like, what's your background? Because it's not a natural pathway that you took from where you started to where you're now. So why don't you walk us through all of it, who you are, it all started, and why you're here now?
Yes, you're right. So who I am. So, I'm a Canadian, and I was born in Montreal, Quebec. My parents are from Trinidad and Tobago, so I'm a Trini, as they say, by heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a lot of my young life really interested and concerned about development. I think at one point I wanted to be an astronaut, but then I was like, no, there's problems on Earth and I'm going to solve them.
Take that, Elon Musk.
Yeah. And so, I did a development I was part of this development project in Peru, and I had all these ideas of making the world better. I think not knowing that much about what might be needed to make the world better, but certainly I got out there. I studied engineering. A lot of my early jobs in my career were related to the environment, and I think my longest stretch there was with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, working on their Green Fund and these other programs. But, in my time in that space, one of the things I started getting exposed to more and more, and this was, a lucky part of that job at FCM, was seeing the whole country, visiting rural Canada, visiting northern and remote Canada, up in the Arctic where there are no trees. And it gave me a perspective, and certainly that trip in Peru gave me a perspective on the fact that not everybody has access to the energy they need. Not everybody has the same economic opportunities. And part of that is because where they are, there isn't the infrastructure, there isn't the energy. And it started giving me a bigger perspective on if we're going to pursue sustainability or sustainable development. It needs to be done in a way that actually works on the ground for people. And what the ground looks like is different. And that means the solutions have to be different everywhere. And that kind of led me into working for the resource sector. So I started first with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, which represents Canada's upstream oil and natural gas industry. And then about 3 years ago, I left that role because there was this opportunity to kind of work with a few people, and some of them are on our council still today, like Crystal Smith, who's the chief counselor of Haisla Nation here in Canada, in British Columbia, Dominic Barton, who was our former ambassador to China, and others who have now joined in. I think there's about 15 of them, and then multiple organizations to start a new kind of discussion in Canada. Because at one point, when you talked about energy, then you talked about climate. Like it was like 1-1, and for the first time, and sadly, it took Russia's invasion of Ukraine to get here. For the
Mm.
first time, it was like, oh, energy security matters. Geopolitical coherence matters. Oh, sometimes these things can make energy really expensive and people can't even get the energy. And I just created this new openness. And I think into this space, myself and the many of the people I've worked with are now coming in to say, how can we do this in a better and more resilient way? And that's how I got here. So that's my long story for you.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Before going further into some of the things you're doing now, Shannon, I wanted to ask you, what, according to you, how did we get to this place where energy got conflated with the climate alarmism? Like, what do you think is happening? How did we lose the plot, or have we ever gotten the plot in the first place?
You
Sometimes I
know,
wonder.
I think, I've reflected on this a lot. And I think that part of how we lost the plot was um, by having a conversation that wasn't informed enough by to like enough experiences and of different experiences.
Mm,
Like I think a lot of the energy policy was led by people, in Toronto and Montreal and New York and who all have energy. They've never had a day in their life where they flicked the switch and it didn't come on. They when the power failed, they could always jump in their vehicle and go somewhere and get a kerosene lamp or something.
mhm.
Um, it had not been as driven by what is a smaller population, certainly in North America, by rural Canadians, people who don't have access to broadband all the time, people who maybe have power failures. Um, that's it, and it's not because people were excluding people necessarily. I think you
They
get
just
a
don't
little bit
know.
myopic,
Yeah, they just don't know.
and sometimes it takes a real shift to break into that.
Hmm.
And it happened, the conflict in Europe, Russia's invasion of Ukraine became the catalyst to break into that. And the other thing that happened is that when Russia invaded Ukraine, it kind of put to light that all the assumptions that were unspoken but underpinning Europe's energy security. Europe has invested heavily in solar, in wind. I think they had, plans for the long term. They wanted to stop using fossil fuels, all kinds of things that were being discussed, before 2022. Um, but because wind is intermittent, solar is intermittent, and you need a kind of a base load to make things work, they were importing Russian gas and not really acknowledging how much of a role that played in their economy, how much of a role it played in keeping energy affordable, and what that meant if you're Germany, for you being able to manufacture in your country because you have affordable energy. And now that that energy source is being kind of cut off, weaned off, I mean, they're still using it. But much
Hmm.
less, not Germany, but some of their neighbors. So
Hmm.
now that they're using less of it, they're also experiencing a lot of high energy prices. And that is impacting whether they have industry. And there are lots of articles out there on this. And so I think, there's been a reckoning, certainly for Europe, which had been super keen on all this energy equals climate.
Hmm.
um, but that also, I think, changed the way they listen to some of their friends. So, when that first conflict or those early conflict days happened, the price of natural gas spiked to crazy prices never seen before in Europe or in Asia. And, boats with cargoes of gas bound for Asia turned around mid ocean. Oh, we're going to get paid more by the Europeans. Turn around.
Turn around.
and and so the Asians were like, oh no, what do we do now? We're going to buy coal because that's what we have locally, and that's more emitting, more polluting in many other respects. And so suddenly they saw their energy security, which is also very connected to their geopolitical kind of geographic security,
That's right.
being threatened because of an energy crisis in Europe,
That's right.
which it was generated in part because of a lack of foresight about what it
Mhm.
means to have a resilient energy system, and a
Mhm.
system that works not just to protect the environment, but people and the cost of energy and all these things. And now we're having the conversation about how do we make sure these things all work together. And
Mhm.
whatever system we have, it delivers affordability, reliability,
Mhm.
low emissions, all the rest of it. But
Mhm.
it has to do it all. And if it only does one, that's not good enough. And,
That's true.
thank goodness we're finally having that conversation.
I agree with you. So, but Shannon, when you were going back to, I liked, it made a lot of sense when you're saying that, and you are so much nicer towards these people than sometimes I am. Because
We
you're
got to
saying,
have a good cup, bad cup.
exactly. No, but I guess you're right. Many of these people, they never had to think about it from the standpoint of just not having it.
Yeah.
And this brings me to your work, the work that you've been doing with the First Peoples of Canada. I think that's very fascinating work. Can you tell us more about that, like how that came to be, what's going on there? And because I think we don't think about them too often. But
Yeah, yeah. No, I'll get some context because I know you have an international audience.
yeah.
So, Canada, like, everywhere else in North America, had people living here before Europeans came
Mhm,
and founded, what is now Canada and the United States, etc.
mhm,
And that history has been a challenging one. Canada, for a long time, had rules about First Nations not being allowed to leave a reserve. The people were in the reserves, and you can't leave the reserve without permission.
mhm,
There were rules around you're not allowed to hire a lawyer. You're not allowed to get a degree. You can't get a
mhm,
bachelor's degree because then you lose your status as an Indigenous person. Like all kinds of not not good policies.
mhm,
And as a result of that, in Canada, many Indigenous communities have experienced levels of poverty that are much higher than the general population. And because a lot of Indigenous communities are in rural parts of Canada, some are urban and some have had different economic opportunities because of that, but a lot of them are in rural Canada. And so there aren't as many economic opportunities. And, for a lot of history, people would just build stuff and not tell them. And so, the pipeline would go by and, that pipeline maybe could have supplied natural gas to the community and given them affordable heating. But they didn't think about that, or they didn't know, or they didn't care. And they're just like, whatever, we're building our thing. But what it had meant is that all this stuff was happening. People were getting benefits out of the resources in these territories where these nations are, but they weren't benefiting. Now,
mhm,
today that has changed, and through court cases and evolution in the law, there's a recognition that Indigenous peoples have rights in Canada. That those rights matters for
mhm,
resource development,
mhm,
and companies are coming up with creative ways to create win-wins. And in the case of liquefied natural gas or LNG, which I work a lot on, um, all of the natural gas projects in Canada, all of the LNG projects in Canada have either an Indigenous regulator. In the case of wood fiber LNG, and that's the Squamish Nation, did the environmental assessment.
mhm,
They have it a key partner, LNG Canada, which is Canada's first LNG being shipped internationally.
mhm,
Their project is in the territory of the Haisla Nation. The Haisla were kind of collaborating with them from the beginning. As part of kind of getting involved in that project, Haisla negotiated pipeline space in the pipe that was going to supply LNG Canada, and that meant that when LNG Canada got approved, they had pipe space to allow themselves as a First Nation to have their own LNG project, and that project is Cedar LNG, which got its final investment decision last year. And the pipe in question has, I think, about 16 or 17 First Nations as owners, so they're already starting to generate revenues from being part of that project. And so what it means is that we're coming from this time of Indigenous economic exclusion
mhm,
to really First Nations being central in some of the most important projects in the country. And what it has meant on the ground, and it's so important to get on the ground, is that these nations have revenues for the first time. That instead of asking Ottawa, because that's the way it's always worked, they would, they'd have to write to our capital, please send us a check so that we can preserve our language, so we can build a school, so etc. They don't have to ask anybody anymore. They have their own money. They
Hey,
made their own deal with industry. They're making their own money, and they're doing their own language preservation and youth
right.
programs and elder programs. And
That's right.
that's the way it should be.
That's right.
Um, But that's what's been made possible through this economic participation. And so when Energy for a Secure Future got started,
Mm-hmm.
you know, many leaders were very quick to come on board. You know, Chief Michelle Joe, who's a hereditary leader from the Miapukek in Newfoundland. Their nation was working on a project in the East Coast, Crystal, of course, on the West Coast, First Nations LNG Alliance, most of whose members are in the West. But they all came on board because it's like, this is our economic opportunity
That's
and
right.
our opportunity to determine our own futures.
That's right.
And we want to make sure that not only the government of Canada understands that and, you know, plays nice, or I don't know what the best way to put it is, but, you know, really works with us so that our success can be the
Yes.
nation's success.
Mm-hmm.
But we also now, and this is an exciting part of what I'm doing, we want to talk to our customers. We want to let those in Japan and Taiwan and Korea and Vietnam and others know we as First Nations people, we're at the table and we want to help you. We want to deliver for you. And in doing that, we uplift our nation as well. So it's very exciting stuff.
I love it. I just love it so much. The Magatweight Show is brought to you by SkinIsSkin. SkinIsSkin is a premium assortment of skin and lip therapy products manufactured with natural ingredients originated in Africa. I founded SkinIsSkin in an effort to create jobs, prosperity, and provide a greater sense of dignity for my beloved Senegal. SkinIsSkin is an African product made in Africa by Africans, bringing money and capital into African economies through value creation. Purchasing African products made in Africa by Africans is what Africa needs to thrive. Visit SkinIsSkin.com and discover our products. And you know, Shannon, I can't help but think that in this model, we and you and what you're doing and the First Peoples, the First Nations, we should really find a way. I wish our African leaders would take a note from what the First Nations people have been able to accomplish. And yes, you can say that supposedly our nations are, you know, independent, but when it comes to the energy sector, because we don't have a technology for the most part, and also you could argue we don't have the money to really go after it properly, de facto, all of our most of our natural resources on the energy side, they pretty much are controlled and mostly, you know, benefited from by outsiders. So you might as well think another nation, right? So,
Right.
but I think there should be a lesson here for our leaders to take from the First Nations, the First People, and what they've been able to do.
Absolutely. You know, I think there's so many things there because it really is when individual nations have just said, we're going to make our own business partnerships. And luckily, the economic and legal environment was there for them to do that. That, you know, change can happen so quickly. What was a decades long problem of poverty gets solved, you know, in one decade
Mhm.
by actually having access to these real economic opportunities. And, you know, I think one of the things I've learned in doing this work and engaging with other countries is that, you know, going back to our first conversation around who's making the rules and what experiences do they have in mind. Right now, there are rules that come out of the G7 that just met here in Canada that say that if you're the Asia Development Bank, if you're the World Bank, you're not allowed to lend money to a country to build a gas powered plant, or you're not allowed to let them build a coal plant. You're not allowed to let them build a pipeline for oil or for gas, anything related to hydrocarbons, fossil fuels. And so what that means is it's not good for anybody, but you know, the dynamic is if you're, you know, if you're Vietnam and you want to build power plants, you got to find a way to fund it. Now, the countries who's been the most, you know, helpful in that regard has been China and its Belt and Road. They're like, well, we'll build stuff for you.
That's
And
right.
so I think there's a level where not only are we not helping the environment by stopping countries who are our friends from getting the money they need to get the energy that their populations need so that
Mhm.
they end poverty and can build their own economies. But we're
Mhm.
also kind of pushing them away from us. We're like, we care the most about the environment and you
Mhm.
need to get in our program. And they're like,
Mhm.
you know what, guys? We have people who need electricity.
Your first world problems don't apply to us. First thing first, all right? I agree.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
they're going to find somebody who will work with them. And I think this part of the shift that has happened now where we're looking at energy in terms of everything it needs to deliver, we
Mhm.
need to also think about our world, which I think we're seeing a lot of volatility now. People are talking about it, but it's like, what can we do in this space? As a Canadian, I think that Canada, with its oil and gas resources, with its uranium and nuclear technology resources, we should strategically be going out everywhere in the world. And some governments provincially are doing this. I know Ontario has been reaching out a lot, but we should be, as a priority,
Mhm.
saying we will be your energy partner. We're going to
Yes.
help you achieve the development you want.
Mhm.
We have the resources. We want to work with you, and in doing so, we bring people closer to us.
Mhm.
And it's good, of course, for our people to have jobs. Our people need jobs and opportunity, but it would, I think, change our standing in the world as a country, to really be a friend, an energy friend, to a world that needs energy.
I agree, and I think the same goes for America, for the USA as well. And so, Shannon, when we go there, what do you feel? I mean, how are you finding the current public discourse about this, about what we just talked about? First of all, where is the Canadian mindset, if I can call it this way? Because I guess everybody, at least I don't know for you, but for me, I was looking forward to a world and a Canada time without Trudeau. But little did I know who would be next, and it doesn't look like this gentleman is really in line with what we're talking about, or has he changed his mind? Because some people say, no, Megan, he's not out of touch as you say, as you think. So enlighten us there, and maybe tell us what's been going on politically speaking, and where this discourse has been going, how it's been happening in Canada, and where things are going right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Um, President Trump uh, got inaugurated. And I think almost immediately, and maybe it was even before he got inaugurated, started talking about Canada as the 51st state, and you guys would be so much better off if you joined us.
I
and, and this created a lot of angst in Canada. There's nothing Canada likes less than Americans kind of saying we're not a real country. And into that space walks Prime Minister Carney, and I think uh, he has said many of the right things. His government just passed a law to accelerate project approvals, which has in itself caused a lot of concerns because the message has been give us a list of projects and we'll find a way to get them done quickly, when
Mhm.
I think the real answer needs to be tell us the most important things we need to change in the law so that
Yes.
Canada can be a predictable, attractive place for investment.
Yes.
And if they would do those things, the money is there. The money is sitting. It's sitting out here outside the camera view,
It is.
waiting to
Uh-huh.
know that Canada is a jurisdiction that can be counted on.
That's right.
That if you invest, you won't have like somebody randomly change their mind at the end. And that's who we have been. So, he has done things and said things that can be helpful. I think that things that really need to happen have not happened yet, and that doesn't seem to be the priority. I will give anybody the benefit of the doubt because I think right now there's so much need and there's such opportunity for Canada. But I always am about what people do and not what they say. And so I'm waiting.
Very wise. Very, very wise. No, I'm with you on that one. So Shannon, I also would like for you to talk to us about your most recent work. And because I love what you've been doing with the First Nations communities, the Indigenous communities. And I also love what you've been doing more of, which is really pull out more data and information about energy poverty in Canada. Because I think people don't think about this. To me, that's the obvious. I mean, look, us in Africa, it's clear. It's there for you to see. I mean, we're the most energy poverty region in the world.
Yeah.
It's right there. People can see it. It's right there. But when they think of Canada, when they think of the UK, when they think of places like that, we're not remembering these people yet. It's here, and the fact that energy got conflated with climate alarmism, this whole thing, and people pushing down on fossil fuels and all of that, it's affecting people in places that we don't think of, and it really breaks my heart. And so I would love for you to be their voice on this meeting today, and tell us about what you guys are finding and what's going on really there, and bring these people up to life, because they're suffering. There's real suffering going on. There's people are dying also.
Yes, absolutely. So, I think there's many levels of issues with energy poverty in Canada, especially now because almost every province, especially our biggest provinces, just don't have enough electricity. Quebec, every winter, that's where I'm from, uh, they have a shortfall of electricity. Ontario has issues, but it's more in the summer. BC has issues. So, um, I think there's an issue with energy planning in Canada more generally, where we need to think about how do we get more energy quickly and affordably. And that's kind of being talked about, but I think there's a big issue now that we have AI, now that we want more manufacturing in Canada. We really need to get serious about how do we get more generation, more transmission, all of these things done. But a layer within that layer is what's been going on in First Nations reserves. So I mentioned, we have Indigenous peoples in Canada, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Many First Nations live in what are called reserves,
Mhm.
and and because of weird jurisdictional issues, energy and electricity and all of these things are managed by provincial governments. And then Indigenous communities, those reserve lands, are kind of managed or dealt with from a policy perspective federally. And so it's like, what should we do here? We see a problem, but then these people in Ottawa, we need them to do something. So, what we've seen, and we worked with Earnscliffe to kind of share information about this. About 32%, so that's almost a third of Indigenous peoples in Canada are experiencing energy poverty. And that means they're spending more than 10% of their income on energy. And it's mostly to heat their homes. Like Canada has a long winter, and in most of the country, it's very cold
Mhm.
for that long
I know.
winter.
I can attest to. Yeah.
And so if you want to heat your home, you need the most affordable energy to do that. And for the most part, the most affordable energy for home heating is natural gas. And if you go by province, Quebec is an exception on this, where they heat most of their homes with electricity. But in Ontario, it's like 70%, and Manitoba, it's over 50%, and on, even to British Columbia, which is another big hydropowered province. Over a third of people heat their homes with natural gas because it's the most affordable way, you know,
Mhm.
joules or energy per space.
Mhm.
Um, and for various reasons, a lot of First Nations reserves, even ones that are not that far from cities. And if you go to our website, you'll see interviews we did with 3 First Nations leaders, and also a paper we've done on this issue. But you might be a 45-minute drive from a city. You might have, as your First Nation reserve, gas transmission and all kinds of, the neighboring First Nation has, the neighboring municipality has it, but you don't have it. At a household level, it's meant that people are paying sometimes $1,000 a month. The highest bill I heard was $1,500 a
Did you
month
say a
to
thousand
heat
dollars a
your
month?
house. $1,000 a month.
And I know these people are not living in mansions.
They're
Even
not living
mansions
in
don't pay, even
mansions.
mansions don't pay this much.
That's right. And so, part of the issue is housing on reserve. There are real issues there. A lot of that housing was also built by the government, and there are issues with maintenance. But so the envelope isn't great. But they're also heating either with electricity, which, in some provinces is quadruple the price of gas per unit, or they're heating with propane, which is more expensive than gas, not as expensive as electricity, but has its own issues. Like it works, but you have to have it trucked in. During the pandemic, there were times when the communities were running out of propane. And then they weren't sure how they were going to get it. They were going out buying space heaters, electric space heaters. And so in some communities, this has meant that the nation, the government of the First Nation, will subsidize, especially homes that are on social assistance, they'll subsidize those power bills. But that creates its own vicious cycle. Because if you're, let's say you're a household on a reserve, you have these real high energy bills. If you go out and get a job to get more money, you get
You
cut off
lose.
from social
Yeah, you lose it.
assistance,
Yeah, you lose it.
but then you are fully exposed to your very big power bill, which maybe your new job isn't enough money to cover. And so you might end up quitting your job and going back. And this is some of what we've heard working with our partners. We've worked a lot with First Nations Power Authority and others. They've been doing energy audits in communities, but these are the social consequences of having energy. It keeps you stuck. And so we've been working with First Nations Power Authority, with the group in Serva, who's really been supportive of our work, to shed light on this. What are the facts and what are the options for getting this done? And there are lots of options, and it's not the first time in history. The way farmers got electricity in rural Canada was the government just deciding we're going to get it to you. And I
Right.
think in a similar way, we need to look at, Ontario has a program to extend natural gas service in rural communities, which has benefited many First Nations. I think they put either a 1% or a $1 charge on everyone in the province's bill,
Hmm.
to cover that.
Hmm.
For each individual, it's not a lot, but for those communities and for those households, it's hundreds of dollars in savings a month. It's the difference between, getting tutoring for your kid or not. It makes a massive difference. And so we want to share the solutions that have worked in other parts of Canada with all parts of Canada,
Hmm.
so that we can solve this. There's no reason anybody should be impoverished by
Yeah.
heating their homes
Yeah.
in Canada.
Yeah. No, clearly not. Clearly not. And so, Shannon, what have you seen to be the biggest, the most important part of your work in making all of this happen? Like, who have you found to be the best levers to push on, or like, who influences who to get to
Yeah.
more of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's very interesting. On the affordability stuff, I think it's really a matter of getting the people in front of the decision makers, because a lot of times the decision makers are in Ottawa or they're in whatever capital city provincially, and the people who don't have the energy they need, they're in these more slightly rural communities or whatever else. They're also extremely busy. And so
Yeah.
finding ways to help them be heard,
Hmm.
I think, is a fundamental part of the work, because when attention does come onto these issues, people respond. Like we put out our paper, the other energy security, addressing energy poverty in Indigenous communities, and the government of Alberta saw that, and they got in touch and said, "Hey, like this is really interesting. Tell us what's going on and how we can maybe do something about this." So, I think awareness and visibility is just
Yeah.
fundamental, and we need to keep working on getting people to hear that.
I
I
agree
think
with
on
you.
the international trade thing, on the actual ending of the poverty by having economic opportunities. Um, I think it's been really important, to have such a diverse group of leaders involved in energy for a secure future. To have the mayor of cities, whose community is tied into the success of these industries. To have the First Nations leaders. To have labor leaders. Imagine all these super different people all agree we need to do this. And so I think that's been really important, because it shows, I think everywhere in the West now, there's kind of a skepticism of capitalism. I know you talk a lot about the free market and why it's so important, but a lot of us grow up with kind of maybe a skepticism, and where the government
Mhm.
needs to protect us from these mean companies or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
There's some of that vibe.
I grew up
And
with that. Up till very recently, I was in the same camp. I'm just kidding.
yeah, yeah, there's a vibe. And so I think that it's important for the companies to say what's important for these industries to be successful and to attract investment and to create the jobs. But it's important for the communities where those jobs are going to happen, for the small business owners who benefit because these activities are happening, the manufacturers who make steel like 1,000 miles away, who that's their customer and they would love more customer. And then, of course, the First Nations locally who are finally at the table benefiting from this economically. We need to make sure that we just take this moment. Like, people like to talk about inclusion. Look,
Hmm.
this is everybody.
That's
This
true.
is finally everybody who's at the table trying to build a better life for themselves by
Hmm.
having these projects, and also enabling a better life for the customer on the other side of the ocean
Yeah.
who is dealing with blackouts. If you're Vietnam and they're doing power rationing, if you're India and they're doing power rationing, it's like, let's end that for them. And
Right.
it's exciting.
That's really cool. It's really cool. And Shannon, what have you seen, if any, um, the role of public opinion, especially in this case? I'm thinking about young people. Like, does it matter what they think or not, and how?
I think it matters so much what they think. And it's hard to know. You hear all kinds of things about the Zoomers, the Gen Z people. What do they think? A lot of them are concerned about their economic future. And this was something I think that came through both in the Canadian election and the US election.
Yes.
And so but they want that economic future in a good way. And, they've learned all their lives that some industries are good and some industries are bad. And so I think it's going to be really important to find ways to reach them
Hmm.
with some of these realities on the ground. There was a blockade when this was in my previous job. There was a big blockade of all the rail lines in Canada to protest a pipeline, which is now operating.
Hmm.
And I went to speak at a university about this. And I knew, the debate in the public was the elected leaders of the First Nations signed these deals, but they didn't talk to their hereditary leaders who have certain rights too with respect to development. Now, as it turned out, some of the hereditary leaders were in favor, some were against. So it was actually very complicated. And for the community itself, the Wet'suwet'en, it became a really divisive thing. Um, Fast forward to today, Karen Ogan, who was the chief then and was part of all that, she talks about how her nation is now benefiting financially and in other ways from this project happening. It's built now, it's flowing way more than any of these protests would have done anything for them.
Yeah.
But the kids I was speaking to at that university, they were kind of asking me like, how can you live with yourself? Or how do you know you're not actually hurting these people? And so I think we need to create opportunities for young people to kind of get out there and meet these people, to go to communities, to see and to hear and to understand that in life there are trade-offs. And people manage these trade-offs, but that they manage them in a way and are to have the best benefit they can for their communities. I think that's vital. I also think that, and this is my secret wish, I just wish we had more co-op oriented education in Canada. People spend their whole education sitting in a classroom, and if we could find ways to get 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds somehow in some kind of summer programs where they go out and they see and contribute to drilling a well, mining. Like, some of these things are risky and hard to do, but if we could find ways to really get them embedded, meeting, hanging out with grown-ups, not just other 16-year-olds, so that they can learn from other people, not just their peers, about some of these things, I think it would go a long way to transforming idealism into kind of being an ally in with that youthful enthusiasm, being an ally of people who are doing things, and it's like being part of the doing things,
Mhm.
as opposed to being kind of an armchair critic, which so
I
many
love that.
people end up being,
Hmm.
when they learn about everything going on in the world on the internet.
Hmm. No, that's a very true point. And so, in regards to that, are there any initiatives? Because I like that idea. Are there any initiatives that are going on right now that are anywhere close to what you just mentioned that maybe some of the First Nations have put together? Or what about their youth? How does their youth think about these issues? And do they talk to other youth about this? Because I'm thinking that
This
at some
is
point the two needs to come together and talk to each
That is
other.
such a great idea. Now we're cooking up ideas on your show. We're gonna
Where
take
you know where
this.
I'm coming from. You know what's coming
I know it's happening next.
next.
No, I love that because one of the things that has been central, the biggest youth population in Canada, I think, is the Indigenous youth population. And when First Nations have, in a lot of the agreements that have been entered into, I can't speak for all of them, but the ones I'm aware of always include a training element, job elements, things that build human capital. And I was just speaking at the Global Energy Show, and one of the leaders who from Nisga'a Nation, and Nisga'a is working on its own project called the Silesums LNG project.
Mhm.
He um, the nation is also working on a pipe that's going to supply that, and that pipe just got its substantive start approval. That just means keep building. But he got people who were trained on that first pipeline to come build his pipeline. And
Mm,
so, these things create this virtuous cycle where young people in their communities, they don't have to leave their communities anymore. They can stay in their communities, they can have a good job, they can get trained, they can bring those skills to other companies, not just the first one they started with. And it can be really transformative. And so I think finding ways. So the First Nations have prioritized that. They're all about, like, how do we help our young people
that's great.
achieve the things. But
That's
I
great.
think you're right. There's a big gap in having those young people talk about the experiences they've had, by getting involved in these things and
That's right.
having the pride of their own income and
That's
being
right.
able to travel for the first time in their life. I can go on a trip somewhere.
Giving me
We're
goosebumps.
we're
It's
starting to
giving,
get these stories, but
mhm.
we need it way more. So that's the next
Yes.
project, Megat. We're going to create a
Yeah.
youth
No,
get
I'm
together.
serious. I'm serious. We're supposed to work on this because I think it's so important. Because think about it then, where you have here the armchair critics who think that they're supporting their fellow
Yeah,
youth on the other side, when the other ones could tell them, "Come on, guys, we're telling you this is from the real, from the place of reality. You got it wrong, and let me tell you this, that, and perhaps maybe invite some of it." And I really think that type of exchange could be very beneficial because
absolutely.
because the armchair critic don't mean bad, but they're just misguided. And so if somehow we can help them have a touch of reality, I think it might be very helpful.
100%. I think of myself as an 18-year-old. I took one course in political and economic ethics at my CJEP, and I was like, down with the corporations. And I don't know. I had all these crazy ideas. I had no idea what I was talking about, nor had I had any of these opinions before I took my course. And I feel it's so easy to kind of get into a certain way of thinking when you get excited about learning something new, but there's
Yeah,
actually so much more to know.
yeah,
and
yeah,
um
yeah. No,
and
it's
yeah.
funny. Yeah, but we will work on that. And I can only imagine you at 18 and,
uh,
already, because you're such a force of nature. So I can only imagine 18 and it's like, yeah, we're going to burn it all down.
we're
I'm
gonna
like,
change the world. Finally, nobody before me had figured it out, but this generation, we
I
have
know.
figured it out.
I know. And don't you love how new generations, the newer ones, are always telling the other ones, "Oh yeah, you guys were idiots, and you didn't have enough courage, and this, and but us, we got it, and plus we have internet." That's what they'll say now. And we have internet and AI, and I'm like, "Oh my god,
Oh
what could
my
go
god,
wrong?"
it's so
But
true.
anyway, but hey, like they say, youth has to happen, right? Let the
Yes,
young be young.
yes,
I think it's lovely.
absolutely.
And they make us laugh, so that's good. But I love that at least they care, and at the
Yes, they
very
do.
minimum, at the very minimum they care, and I think that's a lot. So Shannon, moving into, tell us what's the plan right now for you, or what are you cooking up? What's going on, and what's going to be happening very soon? Is there anything you're working on more beyond what you've been doing so far that we should hear about?
Yeah, like I think that we're in this big moment in Canada that I call the build baby build moment. That's a quote from our Prime Minister, Mark Carney. We're gonna build baby build. So great, we're gonna build. But this kind of build baby build conversation has created a lot of concern, including among Indigenous people, that their rights are going to be railroaded. So, they're involved in these projects, but now they're just going to get railroaded because everybody wants to just build stuff. And I think that this is a moment where certainly a lot of the partners that we work with want to go out and share their experiences with others, and have been, as I mentioned, the Global Energy Show and these. The First Nations Power Authority had a conference here in Calgary a few weeks ago. It's like, how do we do these things right? And many of the nations themselves have learned and certainly understand things need to move if we want to be part of that international story. On the other hand, they really think it's important for things to move in the right way. And luckily, there are a lot of lessons on how things can move in a right way. And so,
Mm,
um, I'm really interested, and I know a lot of our partners are interested in sharing that story. What do we do? I think too, what I'm interested in, there's a whole conversation that still needs to happen about how do we actually what projects do we do? What projects should we do? Does the world still need LNG? We just shipped LNG. Should we ship more? Like that debate is still kind of simmering.
mm,
And so I think it's important, to have the voices of our customers heard in Canada. So, I did an interview with Taiwan's ambassador here, the representative in Canada, he's called. We did an interview with Korea's ambassador to Canada. We've done lots of conversations with Japanese leaders that we've put, because we did a mission to Japan and kind of met with the government and met with importers and went to a power plant and really tried to understand what's going on and project that back into Canada. And I think it's absolutely vital that we do more of it because, to our, discussion, Canada has all the energy it needs for ourselves. It
mhm,
is easy for us to not understand the limits that other countries have. And so we really need all those countries to continually come and tell us, hey,
mm,
we really want to work with you. Hey, we really need your energy. You're
mm,
if we don't have you, we who do you think we're going to rely on? And even in a world, and this is certainly something we heard speaking to leaders in Japan, even in a world where Japan buys more American energy, they still want Canadian energy because they want a diversity of suppliers.
Precisely. Yeah,
Because
you don't want to put all your eggs in the same basket. I mean,
exactly,
yeah.
and it's like, let's keep that in mind. The other thing we learned though is that a lot of countries in Asia, and thinking of Korea and Japan specifically, have long-term contracts with Russia that are going to be expiring soon. We need to get ready now to get in there and be part of replacing those if that's the role we want to play, and it's a role I think Canada should play. So I think there's a lot of work to do to talk to people about that opportunity, and again connect that customer insight into what can be a very closed Canadian conversation about what should we do and what does it mean. It's like, no, like let's bring others in here so that we do this in a smart way,
Mhm,
informed by the realities of the whole world, not just
mhm.
our kind of lens on the whole world.
At this point, and for people listening, what's the best way for anybody listening to support you, support your efforts? Like, where do you need help? What do you need? How can we help?
Um, I'm always excited to talk to anyone who believes in, affordable, reliable energy, resilient energy for as many people as possible.
Mhm,
And so I encourage people to go to our website,
mhm,
to sign up to our mailing list, to email us. And the email address is there. And I'm happy to talk to people about ways to work together, ways to kind of complement. If you have a study that you think really fits this conversation, tell us about it. If you have young people who want to meet other young people, now tell us about it. But everything's on our website, www.energysecurefuture.ca. That's a place to go.
Thank you so much. And Shannon, is there anything that we didn't go into that you would like for people to hear about? And it can be about the fact that maybe you're getting a new puppy next week. It's fine.
Oh my goodness. I think I think that the thing that I wish is that we can find ways for more people. We talked earlier about young people working in the industry, but I think everybody needs to understand where our food comes from. Like, how do we now feed 8 billion people with less land
Yeah,
than ever in history? Like, how did that happen? Like,
yeah.
how do we move it around the world? How do we so I think that, I'm looking for ways, and to the people who want to visit our website, to find ways to help people not only understand that, but to take pride in the accomplishment. I almost feel like today people feel like, oh, there are too many of us, and we're doing the wrong things and
I
whatever.
know.
And it's like, do we remember, like, 2 generations ago, my grandmother was cleaning laundry on a board in her backyard. You know what I mean?
I know. I know.
And for some people it's not 2 generations ago, and that we've accomplished a lot, and these
Hmm.
things have made people's lives better. And so, yeah, I don't know if we haven't talked about this. I know you do this kind of work, McGad, and I want to say to you, thank you for doing this kind of work, because people need to understand not only what's going on out there and why we need to help Africa get energy and other parts of Asia and the world get energy, but people need to understand that actually what we were able to do,
It's
what
amazing.
despite bad history or whatever, all the things which happens with human beings, that we've
That's the thing.
actually achieved some incredible things that have
Yeah,
helped a lot of people, including
yeah,
you and I,
yeah,
have
yeah,
safe lives, and
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
should be happy with that, and we should
Hmm.
build on the good things. So
Absolutely.
keep telling the story, Magad. Keep doing that.
We will keep trying. We will keep trying. And I think this makes me want to bring up this other body of work, which is, I think, again, it's a reminder to remind everybody who wants to really tap into what you just talked about, the fact that we've come a long way, and most people don't realize that. We as a species, as people, as humans, we've come such a long, 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 long way against all
Yes.
odds. And yes, can we do better? You betcha. And are we going to do better? Yeah. And like you said, we're going to do that by not only tapping from the very best of what has allowed us to get to where we are, adding more to it, and changing what maybe was not so good in retrospect, changing
Yeah.
to something else. But we've got solid foundations, and like you said, so I think people need to be reminded of the concept of human progress, and there's a website called humanprogress.org. Whenever I want to get this lose faith in humanity, you go to that website and it gives you all faith in humanity back, because when you go there you realize how far we've traveled. And I don't know for you, Shannon, but for me there is no other time in history, including my yesterday, literally yesterday, but I would want to be living than my today. So I think people need to remember that.
Absolutely. No,
And
I
there's,
think about that all the time. I
yeah,
mean, the other thing that I did as a project a number of years ago was interview all my relatives who were still alive in their 90s. What was life like
mm,
for you?
mm,
Why, if you had to leave your family, my grandmother was kind of given away to this other family that helped run this agricultural plantation, because her own family couldn't take care of her. But, like, hearing their lives,
yeah,
and knowing the opportunities they had and didn't have,
mm,
and that they still believed in the future, and they still believed in what their kids could have.
yeah,
It makes me really feel that I stand on their shoulders. I got the things they didn't have.
yes,
And I got those things in part because we're in 2025 and we have internet and we have all these things,
that's
and
right.
women can work
That's,
and
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But it's like we should be. even on the social side of things,
Mm,
recognize how lucky we are,
mhm,
certainly in Canada and the
mm,
US, um, to be able to lead the lives that we do. And we
mhm,
should lead it with that humility, knowing
mhm,
those who have come before us, what they would have
mhm.
expected for us. My grandmother would not expect me to feel sorry for myself because she
Exactly.
had a much harder time and she
Yeah.
never felt sorry for herself.
And you know what, Sharon? It's so true what you're saying. Something that I have seen also is, I think those generations, they were just happy to know that whatever life they were living is not going to be as good as the one that their kids would live. And it was fine. And that's where they took their pride from. Where I
Hmm.
feel that younger generations, and I don't blame them directly, I blame all of these weird expectations that have been set on them. First of all, I think many people forget that life is suffering. It is suffering. So this idea that you're going to be joyful all the time, oh, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. And so my point is, I think there is something about these earlier generations that were perfectly happy knowing that it would require for them to suffer a little bit more for the ones coming next to have a better life. And I think there is something there that got lost. I think the generation of today just want everything right now. And it's almost like nobody should have a better life than I have today. And I'm like, what does that say for the future? You know what I mean? It's weird.
Yeah, I think people they it's not just that they think they should have a better life right now. I think people think it's normal to have the comfortable life. And they
Yeah,
forget that for most of human history, most people were poor. And a very few people, the king and the other aristocrats or whatever, were wealthy.
yeah.
And now there are more of the descendants of the people who were poor who have gotten to have a better standard of living because of education and whatever the opportunities that have been created.
Hmm.
And so I think with a sense of history, and I think with a sense even of our own family histories, we can kind of calm down and be gratitude. Gratitude is the secret to
That's
happiness.
the
Somebody
key
said
word.
that.
Yes, gratitude is the secret remedy to feel better about everything we've got. I thank you so much. I know I agree with that. Well, Shannon, this has been a very great conversation. I'm so glad we got to do it, and much more work to do. I thank you and commend you for the work that you do day in and day out. And
Thank you.
First Nations are very lucky to have you. I've seen you with them. I've seen you guys together, and it's amazing. And I love the work that they're doing to free themselves up and affirming themselves and be
Hmm.
making sure that they're also going to benefit from what's underneath their ground.
Yep.
So it's been very encouraging for me as an African to also watch what they're doing and to know that you've been right there holding hands with them together, walking. Thank you for the work you do. And I wish many more people learn about the work that you do over there. And yeah, and I look forward to the First Nations also teaching us a couple things back home in Africa as to how to take advantage of your own resources.